Hello everyone, I'm Nitahone, and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. I've done 86 MTG Top 10s over the last year and a half or so, and over that time I have covered a lot of keyword abilities, things like Lifelink, Death Touch, and Flash, and these are all beneficial keyword abilities, but today we're doing a keyword ability that generally gives a card a downside, and that's Defender. I was inspired to make this list because Iconic Masters, which I will be drafting shortly and recording videos of, has an entire color pair built around the Defender Matters theme, and it made me curious what defenders have been the most successful. The mechanic means a creature cannot attack, and it has an interesting history. In Magic's early days, there were also creatures that couldn't attack, but instead of being a keyword ability like Defender, there was an entire creature type that was unable to attack, and that was just part of the rules of the game, and those were walls. This created some weird problems though, for example, making cards that turn creatures into any type of your choice, having to say non-wall, and with the release of Champions of Kamigawa in 2004, the Defender keyword ability was officially introduced, and all walls were retroactively given that keyword, and the rule that walls can't attack was removed from the game. This also allowed some more design flexibility, as creatures of any type could be given Defender, which makes sense flavor-wise instead of only walls. Creatures with Defender are usually undercosted for their stats and have very high toughness, and flavor-wise it usually indicates that a creature is just incapable of really moving, basically. It's just static, basically. However, the majority of defenders that have actually impacted the game usually have something else going on that makes them playable, not just their high toughness, as a cheap creature with high toughness who is unable to attack generally just isn't going to be worth it. Your opponent can just go around it, for example. There are almost 300 creatures with Defender in Magic. Let's talk about the 10 that have had the biggest impact on the game. Just a reminder on how I score cards on this list. Pro Tour top 8s are worth 2 points, and Grand Prix top 8s are worth 1 point. At number 10, we have Bonded Fetch. Unlike most defenders, the Fetch has low toughness, and it also has haste. Defender and haste is a pretty weird combination of keyword abilities. However, the Fetch's toughness isn't what led to it seeing play. Instead, it was the fact that it could loot. Unlike most looters, the Fetch can also do it right away, thanks to haste. Looters are often nice in graveyard-based decks or control decks as they drastically improve your card quality while also letting you throw things into your graveyard that will be more useful there than in your hand. Bonded Fetch only saw play in one format, Standard, and in one deck, and it was a deck that sought to reanimate creatures from the graveyard using Revelark. The deck liked reanimating creatures with low power, but powerful into the battlefield abilities like Muldrifter, and Bonded Fetch could help you set that up. While the Fetch's relevance was short-lived, putting up all of its numbers between May and August of 2008, this did include a Pro Tour top 8 and 2 Grand Prix top 8s. At number 9, we have a more traditional defender. It has the wall creature type and huge toughness for 4 mana, and that is Wall of Reverence. However, if this was only a 4 mana 1/6 with defender and flying, it probably wouldn't have seen play. Wall of Reverence gets additional value for you thanks to the fact that it can also gain you life every turn. This wall is hard to attack through and hard to kill with cheap removal, and adding life gain to that is a nightmare for aggressive decks. As a result, the primary home for this wall was control decks, as it could quickly allow them to stabilize at a low life total between being able to block and gain you life. Like Bonded Fetch, this card saw all of its play in 1 year, 2009 in this case, putting up a Pro Tour top 8 in Gabriel Nassif's 5-color control deck from Pro Tour Kyoto, and a Grand Prix top 8 in a Revelark deck. After all, the wall could be reanimated by Revelark, and a top 8 at Worlds in 2009 in a Naya midrange deck. At number 8, we have the only defender on the list that makes the list basically because it's a great blocker. Walla Frost brings you 7 toughness for 3 mana, and any creature it blocks gets tapped down for a turn. While it may be here simply because of how well it blocks, that additional line of text is what led to it seeing play, as that was an excellent way to buy yourself time against aggressive decks. Wall of Frost saw all of its play in a single deck, Devotion to Blue during Theros Standard. These decks wanted as many blue mana symbols on their permanents as possible to do powerful things like make a ton of mana with Nykthos, or play a Master of Waves who makes like 10 elemental tokens. Wall of Frost helped those decks make their devotion higher by providing 2, and slowing down opposing cards. The first few cards we've looked at saw play within a relatively tight period of time, but Wall of Frost saw play in an even narrower time frame between October 13th and 20th of 2013. During that time, it put up 2 Pro Tour top 8s at Pro Tour Theros and a Grand Prix top 8 at Grand Prix Louisville. At number 7, we have one of the Defenders Matters cards from the original Zendikar block. Really, the only limited format that has had this as an archetype, which Iconic Masters also has, with the Battlement actually being one of the cards reprinted. 2 mana for a 0/4 isn't the most impressive stats compared to some of the Defenders we have seen, But this battlement provides you with some serious ramp too. Even on its own, being able to produce one green is nice, but things get really silly when you have multiple defenders in play, and it can power out truly frightening things. In Standard, it saw play in Eldrazi decks, which sought to just ramp huge Eldrazi into play, and Valakut ramp decks. Valakut decks tried to quickly ramp into Primeval Titan, which could then search up Valakut, even up to 2 Valakuts, and then search up Mountains on subsequent turns, just killing the opponent with the Primeval Titan and the damage from the Valakut Molten Pinnacles. And Overgrown Battlement helped make that happen even more quickly, thanks to the fact that it could ramp. At number 6, we have Stinging Barrier, one of Magic's older walls that has since been eroded to have the Defender keyword ability. As far as defensive walls go, you want a lot more toughness for 4 mana, but what pushes this defender over the edge is the fact that it can ping players or creatures, making it a creature who can block a lot of things, but it can also kill things and even be a potential win condition. In Mask's block, the barrier was played in a mono-blue control deck that ran the usual massive number of counterspells and card draw spells, but also contained an oppressive prison enchantment in Rising Waters. The deck ran mana rocks and spells that could be cast for free if you returned islands to your hand, so it didn't suffer as much from Rising Waters as opponents did, and the deck could legitimately, and very slowly, grind out a win from using Stinging Barrier's activated ability every turn. Most people remember Pro Tour New York in 2000 being dominated by Rebels, and it was. 6 of the top 8 decks were broken Rebels decks, but this Rising Waters strategy worked pretty well against them, with 2 decks running Stinging Barrier and Rising Waters, making it into the top 8 as well. Stinging Barrier saw play in Standard 2, putting up 2 top 8s at Worlds in 2001, in a different kind of blue prison deck, one that ran Static Orb instead, but the plan was pretty much the same. At number 5, we have Plume Veil. Unlike most defenders, Plume Veil also has high power, giving you a 3-mana 4/4. This means that unlike a lot of walls that don't see play, Plume Veil killed most creatures it blocked. What really made Plume Veil good was the fact that it had flash. This effectively made it a removal spell, as you could flash it in to block and kill a majority of creatures. It saw play in Lorwyn block constructed, putting up 2 Grand Prix top 8s in control decks, which often only ran 1 main board and could sideboard more against opponents where it was especially devastating. It saw play in Standard 2, appearing alongside Wall of Reverence in Nassif's 5-color control deck, but also finding a more permanent home in Fairies, a deck that loved playing creatures at instant speed, so Plume Veil was right at home. At number 4, we have the most recent defender to make the list in Thing in the Ice. This card got a lot of buzz when it was spoiled, with some people thinking it was overrated and others thinking it would see play in Modern immediately. Both were kind of wrong. It took a little while to find a home, but it has proven that it is a legit threat in spell-heavy control decks. Like Stinging Barrier, this defender is also a win condition. As a 2-mana 0/4, it can block early things, and then if your deck is loaded with instants and sorceries, and I mean it is if you're running this, it can be flipped into a creature who does not have defender, and is really scary. That is a Woken Horror who bounces all of the creatures in play, which usually just means your opponent's creatures if your deck is built correctly. One of the best things about a Woken Horror is that you get to choose when it transforms, and you can do it at instant speed if you're casting an instant, which is especially devastating and difficult to play against. This really only sees play in control decks for obvious reasons. Awoken Horror put up 2 Pro Tour top 8s at Pro Tour Kaladesh, one in Grixis control and the other in a blue-red tower deck. The latter would become the main home of the card in Standard, as it put up 3 more top 8s in that deck in 2017. Thing in the Ice has found its way into Modern as well, showing up in decks like Jeskai Pyromancer, Blue Moon, and Walks, which is a deck that just ran a bunch of ways to take extra turns. It seems likely that Thing in the Ice continues to see play in Modern, since it is already making an impact there, so it could improve its score over time. At number 3, well, we have 3 cards. If you've watched a lot of my MTG Top 10s, you know I include more than 1 card in cases where the cards are all very similar so that they don't take up multiple slots in the video. This allows us to discuss a larger variety of cards in these videos, and that's what I did here. Wall of Blossoms is the oldest of the 3, with Wall of Omens being a color-shifted version of it, and Carven Caryatid being a bit different than the other 2, but all of them are defenders that draw you a card and don't do anything else. That is some nice value, though, for slower decks, as these creatures pack the stats to block effectively, while also digging you deeper into your deck. If I included each of these in their own slot on this list, Wall of Omens would be the actual number 3, with Wall of Blossoms number 4, and the Caryatid at number 5. Wall of Blossoms first saw play in Standard and Recurring Survival, a reanimation deck that required you to sacrifice creatures, and Wall of Blossoms was a good choice for that, as it provided you with a card despite the fact that you have to sacrifice it. It also saw play in Extended, showing up in decks like Alurin and Infinite Life Gain combo, where it could help you find your combo pieces while slowing down the game. Chronologically, Carven Caryatid came next, appearing in Ravnica. It cost 1 more green mana, but it came with a substantial boost in power and toughness, making it a defender that was actually capable of killing creatures in combat. In block, it saw play in control and mid-range decks like Bug Control and Abzan midrange. In standard, it saw play in Gauzy Glare decks. These decks ran a card called Glare of Subdual that let you tap your creatures to tap down your opponent's permanents, and Carven Caryatid filled in nicely there, helping you find your Glare by helping you draw cards and holding off ground attackers, and it could also be tapped with Gauzy Glare to tap an opponent's permanent. Wall of Omens is the most recent of these, which, as I mentioned, is basically the same card as Wall of Blossoms, only a different color. Wall of Omens was a staple in blue-white control decks in the standard of its time, doing just as its predecessors did, drawing a card and blocking creatures until the control deck can play its win condition. Extended ended in 2011, but Wall of Omens was around for a year before it ended, putting up top 8s in a variety of control decks, including Mystical Teachings and blue-white control. Modern has been its biggest home, though, where it has shown up in a ton of decks running white. This has included Cobblade, versions of Splinter Twin that ran white, Court of Calling decks, and Birthing Pod. The Wall picked up its most recent Modern top 8 earlier in 2017 in a Death and Taxes deck at Grand Prix Vancouver, so it figures to continue to add to its score. At number 2, we have Wall of Roots, the oldest card to make this list. Wall of Roots has a pretty interesting design. 2 mana for a 0/5 is a nice blocker, but Wall of Roots won't stay that size for long. This is because it trades its toughness to produce mana for you. Specifically, it uses -0/-1 counters to do so. It only saw a little play when it was originally printed in Mirage, putting up only 1 top 8 in Standard at Worlds in '98, in the same recurring survival deck that Wall of Blossoms saw play in, and it saw some play in Extended too, in land destruction decks where it could help you ramp into a turn 2 Stone Rain, and in black-green midrange decks. However, that first printing would not be the entire career of Wall of Roots. It was eventually printed as a time-shifted card in Time Spiral block, which made it legal in Standard again, and also means it's modern legal. The second run through Standard was much more successful, with 7 Grand Prix top 8s and 1 Pro Tour top 8. This came primarily in control decks and ramp decks, but also included a few fairies decks. In Modern, it has shown up primarily in Birthing Pod, where it could help you get the pod out quicker, and once it had outlived its usefulness, could simply be sacrificed to the pod to search up another creature. Birthing Pod was, of course, eventually banned, but it has lived on in the descendant of that deck, which are more focused on Court of Calling and Collected Company to toolbox creatures into play, but Wall of Roots still provides a valuable asset at doing that more quickly. It hasn't seen play since 2016, though, and it remains to be seen if it can add to its score. Even if it does, the number 1 card on this list has such a big lead that it would be very difficult for Wall of Roots to catch up. And at number 1, what we have is Sylvan Cottage. Yeah, I had to say Caryatid multiple times in this video. This is another mana-producing defender, but this one also comes with hexproof, making you feel pretty secure that it will continue to be a mana source. Mana dorks are always powerful in Standard, and this one is a pretty good one. It is hard to kill with spells, and can also block reasonably well in the early game while fixing your mana and ramping you. It was one of the best cards in Theros block, as evidenced by the fact that it put up 7 top 8s at Pro Tour Journey into Nyx, which was the block Pro Tour. It saw a ton of play in Standard too. Again, ramping into your 4-drop on turn 3 is no joke. In its early days in Standard, it saw play in a wide variety of decks. Aggro decks wanted to play this so they could drop their 4-drops early, and control decks wanted to play their sweepers and win conditions as quickly as possible and have access to as many colors as possible, so it saw play in Gruul aggro, Jund aggro, and 4-color control. Once Khans of Tarkir came out, Sylvan Cottage could let you play a Siege Rhino on turn 3, something it did a lot of in Abzan decks. It also saw play in Devotion to Green in its various incarnations. It hasn't seen very much play since rotating out of Standard, but it does have 1 Grand Prix top 8 in a Jeskai Ascendancy deck back in 2014. And it doesn't seem completely far-fetched that it could see play in the future in Modern, though it has to compete with creatures like Birds of Paradise and Noble Hierarch for a slot in decks that want mana creatures. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so others can enjoy it too. In the comments, let me know what your favorite creature with Defender is, and don't forget to subscribe to make sure you catch all of my MTG Top 10s. Also, these videos are sponsored by 5colorcombo.com. You can head over to their store and use my discount code NITSAHONE5 for a 5% discount. Thanks for watching.